In a working day, there are many different ways we connect to the news in our world. We sit down at the table to read the paper. We jump in the car, flick on the radio and listen to the news.
7:30, good morning. I'm David Armstrong.
We click over at work or bring out the phone and check the latest news online. But at 6 p.m, we sit down. The pictures and sounds come alive and we're given an insight into the world around us. But who is on the other side?
Good evening.
Melbourne, the most livable city in the world, known for its sport, shopping and freeways when they're busy.
It's a wide and diverse city, a big city, from north to south and east to west. Any news service in this city is obliged to cover every corner.
It's to this backdrop that Peter Hitchener and the entire Nine News team present their news service. I sat down with Peter Hitchener to discuss his career and the trust that has been placed in Nine News for more than 50 years.
Thanks very much for joining me today, Peter. It's great to have you with me.
It's a great pleasure, thank you.
It's a very long career, over 45 years. When does the job ever get boring? Has the job ever gotten boring?
It can't. It can't get boring because every day you have new deadlines, you have new stories to talk about. So while the general idea of news broadcasting is pretty much the same all the time, the fact is it's a constantly changing landscape and you can't get sick of it.
What is it for you, do you think, about a television news bulletin at 6 p.m. That has been so successful since the inception of television?
Well, it's like a modern day version of the storyteller, I suppose, in the in days gone by before mass media. There was a village meeting point and there was a storyteller, and it's to do with that. And I think it's also why television is so great is that, of course, you have pictures with the stories you're reporting on, you hope. And it's a way of having a reader, somebody to tell you the story, to read you the news, puts it into context, and you hope that the reader is informative but also has a kind of reassuring quality to what they're doing. So even though you're talking about terrible things, it could be a tsunami or an earthquake or whatever it's about, the idea is, well, the sun will come up tomorrow and we will be all right eventually.
There'll be better news someday soon.
Exactly.
Something like that.
Yeah.
What is your greatest responsibility?
I think that's a great question. We have a lot of responsibilities. We have to be accurate and we have to be right in what you're reporting. And if you get something wrong, you've got to report that and clean it up. But what you also have to be, more than that, is you have to be relevant to what people watch, what they want to watch, what they're interested in, what's important, what serves the community. Sometimes you run a story more as a matter of record than anything else, but it's just something people want to know. This was the upshot of that event that we've been following for a long time.
Known as Hitch to his friends and colleagues, news surrounded this Queenslander from an early age.
I must ask you, what was your first connection to news in the media?
Oh, well,
going back a couple of years.
This is going back a very long time, back into the Middle Ages when I was at school. I thought at school that I was interested in news. I was interested in broadcasting. I'd grown up in the bush, and there our newspapers. This sounds so different in this day and age, but back then, the newspapers only came a couple of times a week, so you'd be always catching up on the old news. So I, in those days, listened to a lot of radio, so there was a lot of radio news.
In fact, Peter still has a soft spot for radio, as it's a part of his job description.
Well, part of my job is to actually talk about the news to people, not only to read it at night, but actually to go on radio and talk about the stories we're covering. And so every day I do a piece on 3AW and several other stations as well. And my job is to just talk about what we're doing that day. So I talk about what the stories are. Then once a week I do a spot with Dennis, an afternoon spot with Dennis. We don't talk about the news much in that. That's more of just a community thing where you talk about a topic of the day.
Time for you to more relax about the other sort of perils of life.
Yes, exactly right. So it's not about news, it's just about the fun things of life, or what's happening in Melbourne, that sort of thing. Something that gets the audience ringing in.
In times of crisis and distress, audiences turn to the news. And for many news readers like Peter, you'd think the job's tough to do.
What stories have distressed you most as a newsreader?
Well, it'd have to be Black Saturday bushfires in Melbourne.
Yeah.
The Port Arthur massacre for the Port Arthur shootings from many years ago was terrible. We were there in the aftermath of that, as we were after Black Saturday. We weren't there in the thick of it, I might say.
This was the 6 p.m. news bulletin the night after Black Saturday. It was tough news for any Victorian, but Peter was surrounded by it.
Welcome to Kinglake, northwest of Melbourne, the town that once was. This surely must be hell on earth. No other words can describe the devastation I see around me, and the final irony is now it's raining.
You couldn't help but come away feeling very depressed and very gloomy and very, you know, sort of weighed down by the things you saw and the experiences people were sharing. We were out in the field every day for about a fortnight, and all in every local community we went to, there were people who'd survived who wanted to tell their story, not on air, but just would come up to you in between bulletins or
Their story
before
just
we
needed
started.
to be told.
They had to tell somebody. There was a whole lot of things about Black Saturday that were upsetting, because we had to report about Brian Naylor's passing, as well as 172 or 170 something other people.
173.
Yes, yes. So it was just one of those horrible stories, and you just didn't think it was ever going to finish.
Peter covered the great Australian story that unfolded in the Tasmanian town of Beaconsfield.
That wonderful morning when Todd Russell and Brant Webb were brought to the surface to make much joy and elation, and they looked wonderful. They looked as if they could have jogged into Launceston. They were in such high spirits.
Do you ever have imagined 14 years ago, when you started as the chief newsreader at 9 News, that people could watch your bulletin or parts of your bulletin on their mobile phone, iPhone?
Oh, it's wonderful. I love it. I'd never have expected that to happen, but I think it's terrific. I love the new technologies. I love the fact that we can engage with the audience in a new way. It's great having Twitter, for instance, because, you know, television is just broadcast, but having feedback, immediate feedback from people on Twitter or on Facebook or however they want to get in touch with us, they might ring up and have something to say, but generally speaking, it'll be on Twitter or Facebook where people say what they think about things. It's terrific because it's much more a dialogue than just a broadcast. Love it.
Love Twitter?
Yeah.
I think we all love it.
Yes.
Too. Has that development of news technology decreased any of the accountability or credibility of news?
Well, I think it's a good thing. I think it's good that people be involved with what's going on, and I think the process should be transparent, so that people know what's happening. So I actually like that. I like the fact that people can ask questions about why did you cover a story this way and not that way, and I think we should be accountable about that.
We've spoken about the past and the present. What do you think the future will entail for television news gathering?
I don't know. I think we're in the hands of technology. Emerging technologies have probably changed things. Who knows how we're all going to get our news in future? But I'm sure that news is something that will always be there. There'll always be a market for it. How we get it, I don't know. I'm not sure what the economic models for broadcasters are going to be, what the media companies, how they're going to make their money. But I know that there will be an interest in news, because as human beings we're interested in one another, we like to know what's going on, and in this day and age you need to know what's going on in the world, because everything that happens around the world is probably going to have an impact on us here, so we need to be informed.
What role do you think the audience will play in the future?
Well, I think there's a democracy much more so now, especially for Twitter, for instance, because people can report something happening, and it happens very quickly, and so media companies can be much more in touch with the audience and with what's happening, because there is that feedback. So the audience will be I think the audience will be increasingly important in what we cover and how we cover it, because it's their choice, really.
Fantastic. Peter, thank you so much for talking to me today.
Thank you, Simon.
Thank you, Pete.
Good on you.
All the best.
Thanks.
Whenever we interact with news, we're making a choice to trust in what we see, hear, or watch. Peter Hitchener and 9 News' story is one of many, with credibility, expertise, and integrity. It's this confidence and trust that is knowledge worth counting on. That trust begins with...
Good evening.